This is ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's a regional intergovernmental organization that comprises 10 countries from Southeast Asia. The organization promotes cooperation between its 10 member states in a variety of areas, from security and politics to education and economics. But is ASEAN an organization we should pay attention to? Why does it exist? And should you even care? Well, to find the answers to those questions, we must first look at the history. Welcome to ASEAN Explained. ASEAN was created in 1967, originally consisting of only 5 countries: Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. In fact, ASEAN was actually preceded by the Association of Southeast Asia, which was established a few years earlier, but was only comprised of the Philippines, Thailand, and then the Federation of Malaya. Upon its creation, all foreign ministers signed the ASEAN Declaration. The declaration defined the aims of the organization as to accelerate social progress, economic growth, and cultural development within the region. This meant an increase in collaboration in industry and agriculture between the nations, as well as supporting one another politically in matters of common interest, both on the regional scene as well as in the larger international organizations that focus on global issues, to make sure that Southeast Asia has its voice heard. Another element that is widely accepted to have contributed to the foundation of ASEAN, but is not stated formally, is the struggle against communism. Now, throughout the 1970s, ASEAN didn't expand its membership, but experienced an impressive rate of economic growth, which only helped strengthen the organization, so much so that it took a unified response to Vietnam's invasion of Cambodia in 1979. By the 1980s, ASEAN took to expanding, with the small nation of Brunei becoming its 6th member in January 1984. This was also a symbolic move, as it displayed to other nations in the region that ASEAN was open to expanding and collaborating with its neighbours. Also in the 80s, ASEAN established the ASEAN Tourism Forum, set up in 1981 to help promote the region as a tourist destination. This saw the ASEAN Promotional Chapters for Tourism being established in 1986 to attract tourists from wealthier nations in North America, Europe, and East Asia. In the early 90s, ASEAN brought in a scheme known as the Common Effective Preferential Tariff Scheme, or the CEPT. It established a schedule for the phasing out of tariffs in the bloc, a big plus for free trade in the area. Its official motive was to increase the region's competitive advantage as a production base geared for the world market. By the end of the 1990s, Vietnam had joined, as well as Laos and Myanmar, and Cambodia in 1999. Giving us the 10 nations that make up the organization today. Now, throughout its 50-plus year history, the Southeast Asian bloc has become increasingly relevant on the global stage, and in 2006 it gained observer status at the United Nations General Assembly, really solidifying its global status. However, one of the most important actions completed by the ASEAN members to date is the signing of the ASEAN Charter in November 2007. The ASEAN Charter made ASEAN a legal entity, and its goal was to turn the bloc into a single free trade area, which would include hundreds of millions of citizens in a part of the world that is rapidly growing economically. Arguably, it can be considered like a looser version of the EU, similar goals but not quite as integrated. So, what does ASEAN look like today? How much influence does it hold globally? And is power within the bloc distributed equally? Combined, the 10 nations that make up ASEAN are home to more than 665 million people. That's twice as many people than in the USA. Most of its inhabitants can be found in the large nation of Indonesia, which also happens to be the 4th most populous nation in the world. Economically, the group is home to an economy that in nominal terms is just over $3.3 trillion, placing it ahead of European nations such as France and the UK. However, in purchasing power parity terms, its economy comes to nearly $9.8 trillion. therefore ranking as one of the largest economies in the world. We're talking 3 Californias. Despite this large economy though, on a per capita basis, the ASEAN group ranks very low. In fact, its nominal per capita figure of around $5,000 is in line with countries like Tonga and Paraguay and Albania, and would rank 92nd globally. But these GDP figures are very misleading. They give us a rough idea of how relevant the bloc is in the global economy, but the economic development between ASEAN nations varies greatly, arguably more so than in the EU. For example, let's take the bloc's wealthiest and poorest members in nominal per capita terms, Singapore and Myanmar. Now, Singapore, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, is an economic hub in Southeast Asia, and despite being home to just under 1% of ASEAN's population, it contributes to 12% of its economic output. In contrast, Myanmar is home to more than 54 million people. That's 8% of ASEAN's population, but only contributes 2.1% of its economic output. That's quite a significant variation, and it needs to be considered when ASEAN members are out dealing with other organizations as well as individual countries, since a trade deal that is beneficial to the wealthier Singaporean residents may have a drastically different impact on residents in Myanmar and Cambodia. But despite these variations in economic prosperity around the region, what has ASEAN actually achieved? What is the ASEAN Way? Since its conception, ASEAN has not been a perfect organization that receives a 100% approval rating from all the residents of its members. After all, this might as well be considered impossible. But despite this, there are some achievements that have come about because of ASEAN, some of which carry more weight than just adding a couple more percentage points to the area's GDP growth figures. The first of which is the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, or ASEAN, or the Bangkok Treaty. Signed in 1995, this treaty obliged the 10 Southeast Asian countries to not develop, manufacture, acquire, possess, or just have any control over nuclear weapons. And although this treaty does have its critics, for the most part it is viewed as a positive and welcoming policy by ASEAN. Another area in which ASEAN has made some progress is in food security, with the project known as MARKET, which stands for Maximizing Agricultural Revenue Through Knowledge, Enterprise Development and Trade. This project is a win-win situation for ASEAN. It encourages trade throughout the 10 members, which boosts their level of integration, while also ensuring greater food security and therefore decreasing the risk of any food price crisis, which, given a changing climate, is a very serious threat. The most recent of ASEAN's achievements, though, would have to be trade-related. That's to say, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. This partnership is a free trade agreement between many nations in the Asia-Pacific region, comprising all ASEAN members, as well as China, Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. In fact, this free trade agreement accounts for roughly 30% of the world's population and GDP, and many analysts have suggested that it will help pull the economic center of gravity towards Asia. So it's fair to say that ASEAN is busy using its political and economic clout to further its interests on a global scale. But what does the future of ASEAN hold? What problems might the bloc encounter in the coming decades? As ASEAN progresses towards its 60th and 70th birthday, there's little evidence to suggest that its economic weight in the global economy will decrease anytime soon. In fact, with large and quickly growing economies, particularly in Indonesia, the Philippines and Vietnam, the expectation is that economically the bloc will have a growing influence in the global economy. However, as with many international organizations, the interests of each and every nation don't exactly always align with one another, and this can cause frustration and potential cracks in an otherwise stable organization. One key geopolitical issue that will become increasingly important over the coming decade is China's claim in the South China Sea. You see, much of the area claimed by China actually falls under various ASEAN nations according to international law, and therefore there is potential potential conflict between China and ASEAN. Now, while this may seem like a simple China-ASEAN standoff, that's not exactly the case, because neither does every ASEAN member agree with the claims other ASEAN members are making within the South China Sea. This tense situation deserves a video in and of itself, but we can say that due to all the nations that are involved, it is widely accepted that this potential conflict could threaten the integrity of ASEAN and economic development in the region. And with ASEAN increasingly becoming more and more integrated, both economically and politically, if any conflict were to arise, the bloc would find it very difficult to ensure that all its members are committed to a uniform response. ASEAN then, despite being formed many decades ago, is still an up-and-coming international bloc. It's guided Southeast Asia through a prosperous couple of decades, and with the political will it has shown in order to get trade deals done, as well as further integrate the area, there's little evidence to suggest that it won't lead the region through another couple of prosperous decades. However, with a further integrated organisation comes its difficulties, since once all the low-hanging fruit has been picked, only the difficult to reach remain. And how the ASEAN members decide to handle these challenges in the coming years will say much about how prosperous its future will become. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this video about ASEAN. It's the first time we've addressed a topic about the Asian continent on this channel, so let me know what you think in the comment section below. As always, remember to like, subscribe and share this video, and take care. Bye.